So, Erez, welcome to the Great Talks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Before Valisyn, what question about life or humanity obsesses you the most?
Ah, well, before starting Valisyn, I was very much focused on really spiritual growth and spiritual development since 2012. And starting around that time, the focus was really on understanding, what is this reality that we're in? What are we part of? Uh, like, who am I in relation to what I'm experiencing? And these were all obviously very deep questions, but they led me down a path that allowed for a deeper and deeper understanding about how this reality works and how to facilitate its well-being.
Perfect, man. How do you personally define wellness beyond health clashes?
Beyond health cliches, is that what the question is?
Yeah,
Yes. Wellness is, if we look at the word in terms of its etymology, the suffix ness means state of being, right? So wellness is the state of being well versus illness being the state of being ill. And what delineates between well and ill is the ability to function. So if there's an increased ability to function, there's more ability, then it's well. If it's less ability to function, then it's ill. So it's enabling versus disabling. And so when we look at wellness this way, it means that it's an increased ability to function, which applies to anything and everything that functions.
perfect, man. You say illness is a reduced ability to function, right? When
Yeah.
did that perspective click for you?
I think it became clear once I started to understand the etymology more, because most of the time when people talk about illness or wellness, they have all these associations and connotations about what does it mean? Like, well, I suppose I must be energized if I'm well, or I must be, with a runny nose if I'm ill, or something like this. And we have all these associations, but there isn't a clear sense of really understanding the structure of it. So when we look at the basis of how this relates to everything we're experiencing, back to the first thing I was talking about in terms of understanding how reality functions, it's this functioning which can be more well or more ill, which means that we can be more well or more ill in the reality we're in. And the same thing about our families, our communities, our countries, our species, our planet, all these things, they all function. They can function well, as in have an increased ability to function, or they can function ill. And so that's the clarity that arose after beginning to delve more deeply into how things actually work.
Perfect, man. What's personal experience push you towards systematic wellness instead of individual self-help?
Well, systemic wellness is really about understanding the wellness of systems versus things in isolation. So oftentimes when we think of wellness, we're thinking of our individual wellness, like my personal physical wellness. That's generally speaking what people are often talking about. Or maybe they'll include mental wellness or emotional wellness. I need to feel good, right? That kind of thing. But systemic wellness is understanding that each of us is a system. We have different aspects that interrelate. So our physical wellness, our mental wellness, our emotional wellness, our spiritual wellness, all interrelate. And we are not only systems ourselves, we are parts of larger systems. So our relationships, our families, our communities, our organizations, our teams, departments, countries, etc., all of these things are larger and larger systems that we are components of. We compose these systems. We are parts of those systems. And once we understand that, we can understand that systemic wellness, the wellness of a system, relates to all these different things. Because wellness, when we look at the individual and at the systemic level, what defines wellness versus illness is essentially the ability to cooperate instead of being conflict. And that's the fundamental thing that we need to keep understanding for systemic wellness.
Why do most people try to fix symptoms instead of systems?
Well, addressing symptoms is just so much easier, right? You see a symptom and sort of like you want to Like you see a nail and you have a hammer and you want to bang it, and very, very straightforward. It feels like, okay, I got it, I found it, there we are. I'm addressing the symptom. Okay, I put the Band-Aid on it, we're fine for now. Okay, and generally speaking, we function this way because our bodies and our minds and our families, we're capable of healing without conscious oversight. So if I scratch myself, I have a little blood over here, I put a Band-Aid on it, and I think you call it plaster maybe in India, but I put it on there and I trust that my body is going to heal, right? And I don't have to really think about it so much. I don't have to tell my body, hey, you need to heal. It doesn't happen this way. But because of this ability to self-heal without conscious oversight, that's quite distinct from looking at a system that we are consciously participatory in, consciously responsible for, and saying, oh, I see why I keep scratching myself or injuring myself or accidentally harming others and stepping on people's toes. And I can see how to address this. As a system, there's an issue here that we can actually resolve by changing certain patterns of behavior. That takes more effort. It takes more awareness, which requires a wider range of consciousness. One needs to be more conscious of the whole system in order to actually address the whole system. And that's the fundamental difference. I only need to be aware of the injury, the symptom, in order to address that symptom. I don't need to be aware of the entirety of my body in order to address this one symptom. And that's why we keep seeing symptom focus instead of system focus. It requires a greater range, a greater degree of awareness, a greater degree of consciousness, and there you have it.
Perfect. What is the biggest unseen cost of modern productivity culture on human systems?
Modern productivity, it all depends upon how one is seeking to be productive. Like, what does it mean to be productive? If we view this from the traditional sense, meaning the industrial sense, we want to maximize the productivity of a factory. Right? This is the standard way that we think about it, at least in the West. Then that leads to a lot of problems because it leads to overwork. It leads to trying to extract as much labor as possible for the least cost from employees. It ruins people's health. It ruins their relationships. It causes all sorts of problems. So in that sense, the traditional sense of industrial productivity, that causes illness, right? If we view productivity in a different sense, if we view productivity as the overall ability of a system to produce, and it's not just the one system, it's not just the factory, but it's not only the factory, but also everyone who works for the factory and all the machines in the factory and all the people that are being served by what the factory produces, and this wider and wider range, bigger and bigger scope of the system, then the productivity of the whole system can start to be aligned with wellness. But otherwise, if we're just focused on maximizing the output of a conveyor belt, then we're going to cause illness in the process.
Perfect. What does it mean to live a functionally stable life?
To live a functionally stable life, I think that would probably entail having a consistent ability to function. So sometimes what happens is that people get caught up, or systems get caught up in trying to maximize something, and then they basically collapse. They overextend themselves. They're not able to maintain their ability to function at a consistent level. So to be functionally stable means that you have some stability, some reliability in your ability to function. And not everyone has that. And it's also not necessarily required to function at the, let's say, greatest potential possible way in order to be functionally stable. For instance, I'm not functioning the same way when I am running as when I'm asleep, right? It's not reasonable to assume that, my stability is going to apply equally to my ability to run a marathon and my ability to sleep through the night. They're quite different. I need to be able to keep different levels of stability for each of those cases. So My ability to sleep in a stable way, consistently be able to sleep every night, my ability to run for a few, several kilometers every day, that's an indication of functional stability. And so that's the clarification I wish to make, is that they don't need to be like every moment I always need to be able to sleep or I always need to be able to run. It's just the ability over a reasonable amount of time for cyclical behaviors.
Perfect. So, as per your experience, how much time of sleep we need to get every day?
How much time do we need to what?
Sleep.
Huh. Well, your body will often tell you. Right? Does a very good job of showing you when you are getting tired. However, at least in the modern world, we tend to ignore the signs. And it's very, very easy for us to trick our bodies. Because if we're looking at screens and we're looking at, our television, phone, bright lights, all these things, it looks to our body like it's still the day carrying on. And because of this, it makes it harder for the body to be like, okay, well, I think it's time to sleep, but maybe not because there's so much light coming in. I'm not really sure. So that combined with things like caffeine, we can fool our bodies very easily. It's when we actually allow for the natural rhythms of the fluctuation of light, of the fluctuation of our body. That's when we get the most accurate feelings of tiredness. And when we actually act on those, that is the optimal condition. When we're actually tuned in so clearly, because we're not seeking to overpower our bodies, we're not seeking to force our bodies to go against their natural rhythms, that's when we're able to actually have just the right amount of sleep.
Perfect. Why do you believe wellness most include physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual layers?
Why must it include these? So I view them as fundamentally different directions or aspects of human wellness. And the reason for this is because these are different aspects of our being that we are aware of. We are aware of our physicality. We're aware of our bodies. We're aware of our minds. We're aware of our emotions. And we're also aware of our spirit. And because of this, our ability to be aware of these things means that how we are functioning in relation to them is more able to be more well or more ill, depending upon how we're operating, how we're functioning in relation to these aspects of ourselves that we are aware of. If there are more aspects that we're aware of aside from these, okay, great. We can include those to a great degree. But in terms of what people generally tend to be aware of, these are the common categories, at least in English, that we can use, and they're easy to relate to, and that allows us to consciously address them.
Perfect. How do living systems behave differently from mechanical systems under pressure?
So living systems, to be a living system, it must function on the basis of dynamic equilibrium. And what that means is dynamic means continuously changing, and equilibrium is the balancing of opposing forces. So we have inhalation, exhalation, right? We're having this balance between these two that we're maintaining constantly through our breath. We're drinking and urinating, we're eating and excreting, we're having all these things where you have stuff coming in, stuff going out. This constant, continuous change that we're constantly balancing ourselves in terms of, energy, in terms of matter, in terms of all sorts of things that we're able to balance out. That is the basis of every living thing, everywhere, consistently. There's no exception. So when we understand that, we can look at, let's say, my laptop computer, and we can see that that's not how it works. It doesn't function on the basis of that. Right? It actually is functioning on a fairly mechanistic basis, even though the mechanism itself is almost entirely electrical and not almost any moving parts anymore. But that's okay. It's still functioning as a mechanism. It's not functioning as a living being. And that's what allows for this delineation, which then allows for us to address the different types of wellness, so that the wellness of my laptop computer will be different in terms of what it requires versus what, let's say, a dog requires, right? You have a different set of needs as to how to facilitate the well-being of the dog versus the well-being of my laptop computer.
Perfect. Do you think society misunderstood what it means to be well?
Yes, I would say that generally in society we do have a clear misunderstanding about what it means to be well. I think it's based on association and correlation, the notion that we looked at certain people as ideals of wellness, like they're definitely, let's say they look healthy, they're active, they're able to do certain things, play games in a certain way, or what have you. Or they have certain abilities that you can view as being like, okay, they clearly they're very intelligent, or they have some skills. Okay, that is correlation. Those things are correlated with wellness, but they're not wellness itself. Wellness itself is an increased ability to function. So it's always relative. And because of this, it's not just the symptoms of wellness that constitute wellness. It's wellness that results in the symptoms that we associate with wellness. And that's why I believe that there's a general misunderstanding about this topic.
Perfect. What exactly is systematic wellness in simple language?
So systemic wellness is the increased ability of systems to function. That's in simple language.
Okay. How is systematic wellness different from traditional wellness programs?
So systemic wellness, in terms of how we address it, is quite different from other wellness programs in general, because most wellness programs tend to focus on different specific aspects of well-being. So for instance, at least around here, there tends to be a lot of breath work for whatever reason, which is great. It facilitates a greater awareness. It helps to release built-up obstacles to the feeling, to the nervous system, to lots of things. It helps to ease a lot of constraints within the body and emotionally and so on. That's great. And it doesn't address the entirety of the system. It doesn't address the full interrelation between the different aspects of one's being as an individual, and does not address things like relationships, the relationships within families, within organizations, departments, communities. All these things are systems. And the functioning of a system is not just the functioning of a human being as a system. It is the functioning of a system as a whole. And we are parts of many, 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 many systems. And so how we are choosing to behave in relation to the systems that we partially compose is essential to ensuring systemic wellness.
Perfect. Why does scaling wellness become harder as system grows larger?
So scaling of systemic wellness is not a linear relationship. So if we look at the wellness of an individual, and then we look at the wellness of a relationship between one individual and another individual, it's like, okay, you say, oh, this is, basically the wellness of the one, the wellness of the other, and the wellness of the relationship, which is a third party. Okay, now let's consider, let's say a family. Let's say a family of 4, 5, all right? So then you have relationships between all of them. So it's not just the 5 plus the relationship, 5 relationships. It's every potential, relationship within that network. So it's combinatorial. So the combination of that for just the relationships within a family, a small family, not even a big one, becomes significantly greater. And the systemic wellness of the family as a whole, not just the relationships within the family, but the family as a whole, is its own thing, right? So it's this combinatorial relationship when you look at the mathematics of it. And then you take the same thing and you say, well, families within a community within a society, and all these things, it becomes astronomically complex, and truly much more complex than any human being can even start to think about. But it's not, let's put it this way, it is still doable when it comes to artificial intelligence and advanced computation. So because the scope that we're used to operating from is limited for the convenience of our brains, we inherently view things from a more limited perspective, more self-focused, more near, not whole, big picture, not the whole system, just the one part. That's why we look at those symptoms instead of the whole system when we're trying to address things. And we can now begin to address the whole system now that we're able to have a greater degree of awareness with artificial intelligence.
Perfect. I like your home.
I'll give credit to Google.
It's look pretty good.
I agree. I like it. I should move in.
Can a system be successful but still unhealthy?
It depends what you mean by successful. So when we look at what the word success means, it means to achieve a goal. Right? If you're succeeding, that means you're achieving a specific goal. Now, what's unclear is what's the goal?
So let's say financial freedom.
Okay. Well, financial freedom can occur with, let's say, one's well-being intact, or one can go and work oneself to the bone and cause all sorts of illness and dysfunction and rob people and, do all sorts of things to have, some financial success, but actually cause more harm than it's worth. So again, it goes to the nature of what success is. It depends on the goals one has. And so even if you're picking something like financial freedom or financial success, being a millionaire and or whatever the terminology you want to use, if that's the goal, there are healthy ways to achieve it and there are unhealthy ways to achieve it. So they're not directly associated. It's only when we choose to value wellness, and specifically systemic wellness, if that is the goal, if the goal is to keep being more systemically well, then you're going to be healthy. The more you are aligned with that goal, the more successful you are with that, the healthier you will be. But without the most useful, most accurate goals, success is not related actually to health.
Okay. What are the signs that a person or organization is systematically unwell?
So to be systemically unwell means that the system has a reduced ability to function. So it has a baseline about how it's seeking to function in day-to-day operations, and it's not really able to do that. It's not able to meet its baseline goals. That's an indication of systemic illness. So that can happen in all sorts of ways. It can be more ill, less ill, matters of degree. There's infinite numbers of permutations about what's possible. However, that's essentially what systemic illness is all about, is you have a desired state, basically a baseline for your dynamic equilibrium, and you're not able to achieve it because your ability to function is not there yet.
How does instability propagate from one individual to an entire organization?
Interesting question. So instability, the inability to maintain one's state, essentially, in dynamic equilibrium. So you're not able to maintain. So you keep going like big up or big down, or collapsing and having to rebuild and collapsing again. So that instability affects everything that you are in relationship with. So if you're in relation to anyone or anything, if you're in relation to a team, department, organization, because you're part of it, so, which means you're in relation to it, then it's sort of like there's like a rope or something, and everyone's tied together in a network of these little ropes, and suddenly some person just collapses and starts to fall, and it's going to tug on everyone else that is either directly or indirectly connected, because we are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how instability propagates. It's like, oh, I need to compensate for this person who is no longer able to hold themselves up now, or they just tripped and they fell. It's like, okay, well, and this is not to say that there's anything inherently wrong with that. I mean, we all trip and fall sometimes. However, that instability does propagate. It does spread throughout the network. And so that needs to be addressed. And it's one of the reasons why systemic wellness is so important, is because it helps to facilitate the wellness of the whole by ensuring that people aren't just, collapsing left, right, and center and then affecting the entire network of interrelationships.
Perfect. What role does unresolved emotions play in systematic breakdowns?
So unresolved emotions, when it comes to breakdowns of systems, it's very similar to any other unresolved issues. So, what emotions are is essentially that they're feelings that have there's an urgency to them. They urge behavior, right? Literally, emotion means outward motion. It's what results from the feeling that is resulting in its qualifying as an emotion. So when you have unresolved emotions, it means there's just an urgency. There's an urge that's encouraging a behavior, and it's being ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So you're having message, you're having information coming in, and you keep ignoring it. So what happens is, generally speaking, if we keep ignoring it, it doesn't just go away. It builds, gets stronger, until at some point whatever is being used to maintain it or hold it, like a dam, the dam eventually breaks because there's just such a big buildup. And then when you have a dam breaking, it tends to flood the valley with all the excess water that previously would have just flowed naturally without any big deal if it had not been obstructed. But now suddenly you've built up this big dam, built up this big reservoir behind it, dam's breaking, and the torrent of water that comes out can be quite harmful. And that's essentially what happens when you have unresolved emotions that build up over time and they're not being addressed, and then suddenly you get this break, usually under stress, and then it causes harm. It can easily cause a lot of damage, actually, to one's relationships, to oneself, and so on.
Perfect. Can wellness be measured objectively?
Oh gosh, yes and no. So wellness as an increased ability to function can be measured on the basis of what you're measuring, right? So in other words, if I have an increased versus a decreased ability of my laptop to function, I can measure that ability to the extent that I'm picking out what to measure. So for instance, if I have a throughput for the data bus for the SSD, okay, for some reason I'm having some sort of static or whatever, it's causing some sort of problems, it's interfering with that. I can actually measure that. I can see, oh, this is what the target is for what the bandwidth should be, and this is what it actually is. So I can measure that objectively, and that would be, I'd be measuring the illness or wellness, relatively speaking, of these two options. Or let's say there's an upgrade. Okay, I upgrade, my CPU, and so now I can measure specifically the ability of the CPU to run operations. Okay, clear, right? I have the measurement, and because I have the measurement, that measurement is of an ability. Because that measurement is of an ability, I can use that. The challenge becomes when you're talking about something like human wellness. Then it's a little trickier to say, well, what are you choosing to measure? I mean, if I'm going to measure my happiness, how do I measure my happiness? Well, right. We can measure happiness to a certain degree, but not very objectively. We can measure it more subjectively. Mm-hmm. So I can say, do I feel happier than earlier this morning? And the answer is currently, yeah, I would say so. But if I was to go and try to figure out, well, how much? What's the percentage? Is it 23%? Is it 37%? It's difficult for me to measure beyond my subjective experience. I don't have a means of, let's say, measuring the expansiveness of my nervous system to give some more scientifically rigorous measurement. And in that sense, it can be less objective when it's difficult to have more of an objective measure. However, the fact that I can still measure it subjectively in terms of the relationship between how I feel now versus how I felt before, is it more or less? I can discern that, right? That means that even there's still some degree of verification, some degree of ability to measure. It's just not as objective, it's not as fine-tuned as it would be if it was measuring CPU speeds.
Perfect. It's been a half hour. Still, I'm looking like a sleepy girl. I don't know why.
I'm glad you still have the energy.
I just complete my work now. Like 11:30, I just uploaded the last podcast. Like schedule it, and whole day I'm editing. So after that, I think it's 3 years left for our podcast. So I think if I don't sleep now, I don't get sleep after the podcast, because now after the podcast it's morning. So if I sleep, my whole day schedule is gone different. So I don't want to do that. So I sleep 2.5 hours and then I'm here. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Well, I will say that naps are often very helpful. And if you want a reference for the most useful times, generally speaking, if you time it to 90 minutes, like set a timer for 90 minutes, it tends to actually be one of the more refreshing periods of time. If you don't have that much time, you can try half an hour. It's still better than nothing. But if you have about 90 minutes or so, you can generally get one cycle of refreshing your nervous system, which is why we sleep. Okay, so it generally results in feeling more refreshed. This is one of those tricks which is very helpful for new parents.
I'm still young. I'm not. So let's move on. What is the cost of ignoring systematic wellness in the long term run?
The cost of ignoring systemic wellness in the long term is generally systemic illness, where you have a gradual, usually, sometimes it's collapsing, catastrophic, but generally speaking, there's a wearing down. And people get more used to doing things, and they get stuck in their ways, and they hold on, and they don't want to change, and they feel threatened by change, and right, that is very similar to what in the human body is referred to as sclerosis. It's sort of this wearing down of, or hardening actually, of the arteries is what sclerosis is, if I remember correctly. Or it's a hardening of the things that need to be soft, is what we're really talking about. And this hardening of what needs to be soft, in other words, this resistance to change, is a reduced ability to function. It is inherently ill. And when there is an ability to adjust, to change, to flow with things that are changing, then you have an increased ability to function, you have systemic wellness there. And that is what enables, it's what enables systems to avoid premature death.
Why did Valisyn start with individuals instead of technology?
Well, it's starting with both individuals and technology, because it's applying technology to individuals. But when we're talking about wellness, what we're really needing to focus on right now, especially in the United States, is the systemic wellness of individuals. So in the United States, people are not taught how to be well. They're simply not taught. The combination of consumerism and the attention economy actually incentivizes illness, systemic illness, because it treats everything as, well, you're just missing, you're lacking things, you need to buy more, you need to eat more, you need to consume more. That's always something more that you need to compensate for, and it doesn't address the nature of having too much. It doesn't address how we need to divert our attention or maintain focus of our attention to things that are important, how to delineate what those are. And I think that the quality of our education, especially in the primary and secondary school levels, has fundamentally gotten worse, and is essentially misleading a lot of people for probably the past 40 years. Sounds about right. Really just not allowing for people to be ready to live lives in the real world. And that's, I think, a huge challenge that employers are facing right now, is that a lot of their employees are just so unwell in themselves. They don't know how to take care of themselves. And many people that are coming into their employment often don't even know how to really behave as adults. They never learned. And that is something that needs to be addressed in order for us to be able to function effectively, first as individuals, and then as part of organizations and part of relationships, part of families, etc.
Perfect. What is embodiment essential for any sustainable wellness system?
Why is embodiment essential for any sustainable wellness system? Is that the question?
Yeah.
So if we're not embodying, in other words, we're actually just talking about it, we're thinking about it, we're not actually doing it, right? We're not actually feeling what we need to feel, because we're not really embodied in our body to feel them. We're not actually acting on the basis of what we're feeling. So we're in theory land instead of in action. All those things are dissociation. They dissociate from the actual experience you're having in your body. So you have a body, right? You're using it all the time. You're doing things with it. Even if you're just sitting in a chair, that's what you're doing with it. It's still there. So if we are ignoring that because we're on our phones, in front of a computer or television, whatever, or we're checked out, we're not aware of what's going on in our bodies, we're not aware of how we're sitting, if we're not having the awareness of our embodiment, that creates a lot of potential for dysfunction. A lot of illness can come from that. So that's why embodiment is very important to address the sense of awareness of the body, and the sense of how the body is feeling, how the body is in relation to emotions, in relation to thoughts, in relation to one's spirit. This is essential. You need to be able to show up in your body in order to be well.
Perfect. I also have body.
Yeah.
Body, not spirit.
Yeah, both,
Yeah, both, but not only spirit, with body.
Yes, you still have a body. It's still there.
Perfect. How does systematic wellness improve productivity without pushing harder?
So systemic wellness, as an understanding about what it is that needs to be achieved, which is a freedom of movement, an expansion of possibility, does not say whether or not it's time to push in any direction. It may actually be time to relax, to let, perhaps you're pushing too much. So there's not a sense of requirement for pushing. And oftentimes, in order to achieve something, going harder, pushing more, isn't necessarily the way to do it. So I'll give an example. All right, let's say that I am walking on a path, and in a forest, and I come upon a boulder, right? And this boulder is on the path, and I walk straight into the boulder, and I start pushing as hard as I can to try to get this boulder out of the way. Okay, and it's just not happening, right? And so I can just keep pushing harder and harder and harder, and someone, of course, will then walk past me eventually and think that I'm an idiot as they walk around the boulder, because oftentimes you don't need to actually push through things. Sometimes it's needing to be aware that there's a better way.
Yeah.
There's more useful, there are ways, if you really need to move the boulder, you can probably figure out how to create some leverage to get it out of the way. It'll be much more effective than just pushing it with your hand. There are many ways that we can find to be more successful at what we're actually seeking to achieve versus pushing ourselves harder out of the sense that I can do it. Like, well, it doesn't matter if you can do it. Is this the thing to do? That's more
Agree.
important. So when we're understanding systemic wellness, the wellness of the whole, it's like, okay, let's just say I go and exhaust myself pushing it. I actually succeed. I'm actually able to move the boulder out of the way just by pushing and pushing and pushing. Okay, was that the best use of my time and my energy? Right? Maybe not.
Yeah.
So systemic wellness is allowing for us to be aware of the entirety of the situation, and be free to adjust and see, based on the goals that I'd actually like to achieve and all the constraints, this is the approach that makes the most sense, versus being caught up in it must be this way. I'm stuck on it being this way. Okay, that's fundamentally dysfunctional.
Perfect. Why do employees underestimate emotional and spiritual wellness?
I believe that when it comes to businesses, especially, they tend to focus on being busy, right? That's the productivity, the action is what they're there for. That's the basis for their existence. And generally speaking, emotional wellness and spiritual wellness and often even mental wellness are viewed as being somehow like not particularly important. There's a sense of, okay, well, you can address these things in your spare time, and this is not for work. And that is essentially a useful perspective for a factory, maybe, right? Where you're not really needing to have any emotional state or spiritual awareness in order to do things with your hands in a factory, an assembly line. Okay, that sort of makes sense, that perspective. But when it comes to anything that's beyond robotic, then suddenly you need to actually deal with real people. And then they actually do have all these things. They do have misconceptions. They do have all these feelings that are in the way of their ability to function. And that reduces their ability to be part of an effective organization. And so it's that mismatch between the industrial era and the post-industrial era, which I think that there's still so much association with the industrial era. That's what it means to be a business, is maximize productivity at all costs, to maximize shareholder value, ignoring that shareholders are actually human beings at the end of the day, and that the well-being of the human being is related to the well-being of the whole. And the well-being of the whole is related to the well-being of the human. So that requires, again, a wider scope of awareness, and that requires more maturity, honestly. So if I needed to just condense all that to one word, it would be immaturity, but I think that wouldn't be understood very well.
Perfect. How does content simulation weaken a system's self-regulation capacity?
Well, constant stimulation is essentially like having the volume on high. So if you have the volume on high the whole time, aside from the potential of going deaf, there's a sense that there's no balancing for the system. It's like it's always on max. There's nothing to balance it out. So everything becomes, a different degree of loud. And so that's what it does is it throws off the equilibrium of the nervous system. And we need times of quiet and times of loud to be alternating, to have the full range of experience and to be able to handle the full range of experience. Now, some people are so used to so much noise and activity that to be in silence is extremely uncomfortable for them. It's almost the equivalent of like someone who's only been in silence suddenly being in a very loud rock concert.
Mm-hmm.
Their system has acclimated to a certain state, a certain range of operation, which is very narrow. And that's what the problem is. You need to be able to alternate in order to have a healthy dynamic equilibrium. You need to be able to have a full range, which means you need both quiet and loud, not, obviously not at the same time, but alternating between. You need light and dark, right? You need the range in order to experience the range, in order to be attuned to the range, in order to be free to experience the range without hindrance.
Perfect. How does your 18 work framework creates lasting change?
The 18-week framing of Feel Love Now, that program, how does it create lasting change? In a few different ways. The first is that it's fundamentally addressing the overlap, the connection between the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So these are fundamentally interrelated. So I can go ahead and give you a bunch of lectures, but if you're not taking actions in your body, you're not training your body. So no embodiment, which is what we talked about earlier. If you're not actually feeling your emotions, right? If you're tuned out from your emotions, so you're too busy just focusing on solving some problems, then you're not aware of your emotional state. You're missing out on what's the information that your emotions are giving you. If you're dissociated from your spirit, if you're so focused on narratives and stories that you're missing out on the richness of the experience you're actually living, right? The truth of your being, if you're missing out on that, there is a fundamental mismatch. So it's addressing all those simultaneously and then training, okay, a little more, now a little more, now a little more, now a little more. It's allowing for this 18-week process of basically a pathway up a mountainside, so to speak, versus, okay, I'm going to take you in a helicopter and drop you off. Right.
Yeah.
You need to build up the strength. You need to experience the fullness of the journey in order to actually be fit enough to do the same thing again and to maintain the altitude. If I go and take you in a helicopter from where you are to the top of the Himalayas, okay, you're going to have a lot of problems, okay? And one of the first things you're going to have is a massive problem breathing.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's going to probably be awful. And you're not going to be in a position to, you're not going to be well in that state. But if you were able to gradually go up over a period of time, then you can acclimate, adjust, build up the capacity to do that. And in which case you can be okay at the top. So that's really how an 18-week program does that, essentially addressing all these things, building up in scale and scope to allow for what would be too hard for people to do immediately.
Perfect. I have an example for it, like if I understand well. So just like me, I could not speak English that much properly, but when I starting my podcast, I'm thinking about I don't speak English. Still now I speak that much. When I start, I could not speak like this. So when I start, I think like, what if? Okay, what's the excuses for not doing the podcast? Let them go out first. So the first is not speak English. Okay, we will improve it time by time. So if you see my first podcast, I could not speak English that much properly, but now I can speak, right? So your helicopter story is like that. Like if I think I will be great in English, then I start the podcast. It will take too long, and it will take too long to learn also the English, because I'm not talking to people in English. Got it?
Yeah. So it's the path that builds up the capacity. And when you're building up capacity, you're increasing your ability to function, which means you're increasing your wellness.
That's the 18-week framework.
Exactly. That's what it does. But that's also what systemic wellness in general does. It's a process to increase one's ability to function systemically. And so that's why it's necessary to maintain this as a constant process. It's not one and done.
Perfect. What invisible feedback loops quietly keeps people stuck in dysfunction?
So we have lots of feedback loops to maintain our sense of self, what we're used to, who we're used to being. And we have stories about this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I have done, this is what I will do because of it's always been this way. So I keep doing this. All these stories, we don't necessarily have to say them out loud. They're assumptions, they're beliefs that are present in the background. They can be quite silent, but they're still believed, which means that they're still acted upon. Our behavior is influenced by our beliefs. So that's how these silent influences can affect these behaviors and cause all sorts of dysfunction. If I'm really wanting to, play soccer, and I want to get better at it, okay, and I'm like, well, yeah, but I never have time. I can't really do that, and I was never good enough. I was never good enough at it, and so I'm not going to spend any time on it. Well, maybe I would like to, but I couldn't. All these stories then prevent us from doing what's required in order to become good at soccer. Because to actually do that would be to make ourselves wrong, to go against our own beliefs. And that's the silent impediment. The cause of this inability to do things is all these beliefs that are in the way, that we have to make ourselves, to allow ourselves to be wrong. We have to welcome being wrong in what we're believing in order to have the spaciousness to then allow for this increased ability to function. And when we don't do that, then we can be very easily stuck.
Perfect. Can a system heal itself, or does it always need external intervention?
So systems can heal, right? So what does it mean to heal? The word heal is related to whole, as in, a whole apple, okay? Mm-hmm. So versus a part of an apple,
yeah,
one bite of an apple. When we look at what it means to be healed, it means to be in wholeness. That previously something was whole and then it was not whole. And to heal is to come back to wholeness. And that requires reconnecting or rebuilding to a prior state or to an equivalent state. So that whole process of healing is something which is happening internal to the system. However, it may require resources that are external. So we can facilitate healing, right? I can, if I can give some medication and some surgeries and some other things to people to help them to heal and more effectively. But they're the ones that are doing the healing. It's the patient, not the doctor, who is the healer. Because it's the patient who's healing, hopefully. Mm-hmm. So that is really an answer to the question. It is fundamentally internal for the process of healing, but the resources and facilitation can be facilitated through external support.
Perfect. How does personal wellness influence collective outcomes?
Well, if I am well as a person and I'm part of, let's say, relationships and groups and so on, then it's easier for me to support the wellness of the relationships and in these larger groups and systems, because I'm already well in myself. So if somebody else is in need of support, okay, I'm well enough, I can probably give a little support, at least temporarily. But if you have, let's say, a bunch of people who are not well, then they're having challenges interacting and they're having challenges. And so those challenges will affect the rest of the organization, the rest of the group, the rest of whatever they're a part of, the same way that when I was talking about having a bunch of ropes and having a network and you're tugging on them, if you're having people that are not able to lift when it's time to lift, right? They're too weak, for instance, they can't lift it, then the ability for the whole to lift a heavy weight is reduced. You're just not going to be able to do as much. So that's, the simple fact of the matter, that it's necessary for there to be wellness among the individuals, And of course, it doesn't mean that you can't have somebody who is not so well and have others compensate, right? If you have, let's say, a bunch of people who are well and, two of them are not so well, then maybe the rest can go ahead and take care of what the lifting that the other ones couldn't do. That's fine, right? It's just that you can't rely on that all the time. And so that's how there's this clear effect. If it was necessary for the entire group to operate with maximum functionality, you have to lift something that's so heavy that everyone has to lift their max. Well, then in order to do that, you need to ensure that everyone is well enough to lift their max. And most of the time, that's not the case, thankfully. But with too much illness among individuals, it becomes impossible to achieve goals for the group.
Perfect. What surprised you the most while working with individuals?
What surprised me the most has been the resistance to change. Because oftentimes people will say that they want to improve something, they want to change something. However, I'll show them how, and I'll give them the tools and these things, and maybe they'll start to use it, but then they'll drop off and they'll forget, and okay, I'll just keep going back to what they're used to, and then be like, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it.
Procrastinating.
Avoiding or going into old habits, even when they are saying that that's exactly what they don't want to do, and they keep doing it, right? So this has been a bit of a surprise to me to see how much there is of that, how much resistance there is. And it can be quite challenging to address that, but it's necessary to face that challenge.
Perfect. What is synergetic artificial superintelligence?
Synergetic artificial superintelligence.
Yeah.
So we will assume that everyone understands at this point roughly what artificial intelligence is.
Mhm.
So, and synergetic artificial intelligence. Yeah. What synergetic artificial intelligence is, it's artificial intelligence which maximizes synergy. And synergy is effectively the ability to work together more effectively than not being together. So if you have one part here, one part there, and they're able to do these things on their own, synergy is that together they're able to do more than they could as individuals. That being together enables them more, increases their wellness. So synergetic artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence which is designed specifically to maximize synergy, to maximize the ability of systems to function on the basis of their interconnections, their interrelationships, not merely the sum of the individual abilities of the components of those systems. So that's what synergetic artificial intelligence is. And this is a fairly new form of artificial intelligence. It's actually not well understood. I actually made up the name to describe this because what it was referred to before was in relation to modeling of living systems. It wasn't given a very clear nomenclature, and so I actually named it this way in order to address that. And now we'll talk about what superintelligence is. And I would say that this is a term which is important to delineate how it's spelled. So superintelligence with a dash, super dash intelligence,
Yeah,
versus super space intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
They're two different things, because when we talk about super space intelligence, generally speaking, experts in the field of artificial intelligence, and they talk about artificial superintelligence, means artificial intelligence which is significantly more, notably more intelligent than any human being in a given domain. Right? It's super. It's above and beyond the capabilities of the human being. That would be considered a superintelligence. When it's super dash intelligence, what it's referring to is it's an intelligence which is overarching. So it's not focused merely on an individual goal, All right. It's viewing the whole of the system. It's an overview, right? So uber intelligence or over intelligence would be other ways of saying this, but they don't translate. It doesn't quite work in English. Okay. There isn't quite the right terminology yet. So I'm using super dash intelligence. What it's referring to is what I was beginning to reference earlier in the conversation about artificial intelligence has the ability now to have such a wide scope of awareness that it can be aware of a very, very, very complex system in many, many degrees that a human being cannot. They simply don't have the ability to process that information. They don't know how to gather it all, and they can't do it. But an artificial superintelligence can. So it can have so much information about the parts, about their interrelationship of the parts, and how the system as a whole is functioning, that it can intelligently interact with the overarching system. And that's what I'm referring to as an artificial superintelligence. So synergetic artificial superintelligence is an artificial superintelligence that is focused on maximizing synergy of a system.
Perfect. How is this different from traditional AI assistant?
So current AI-based assistants are usually using some sort of large language model in order to converse effectively. And those are useful for providing generative answers based on probabilities. So you have correlations of meaning, statistical correlations of meaning, and then it's using those statistical correlations of meaning to infer likely outcomes that might be useful based upon its training corpora and other rules that are provided as part of a secondary phase, a training phase. It's after the language model creation process. So that is fine for addressing useful probable outcomes, right? What is likely to be useful based upon this huge web of meaning that I have access to. Okay, great. That doesn't actually maximize any system. It doesn't model a system. It doesn't give a sense of how does the system function, and then based on this, how can I model different permutations of what the system can be adjusted to do in order to maximize its ability to function. So that's very different. It's actually related more to self-driving vehicles, for instance. So when you look at a self-driving vehicle or a robot that's navigating a complex landscape, let's say a bipedal robot's going through a forest and it's trying to achieve some goal, right? That's much more complex because you need to not just have a statistical inference about what's likely to be the outcome. You need to be aware of your environment in real time. And you need to navigate your environment, and your environment is changing. So you can build up a model of your environment. However, that environment, that model, is not static. You'll need to update that model with new information as you move through the landscape. To do that, and to be aware of potential counter effects and to figure out how to navigate through this and to maintain one's state of well-being in the whole of it, that's what we naturally do automatically as human beings. We're used to doing this. So much that we don't think about it because we don't verbalize it. We don't talk about it so much. Why would we? We just do it. However, this is actually much of what is happening for the functioning of our nervous system. We've evolved to be able to handle these extremely complex situations, to be able to navigate these social dynamics, to navigate physical, unknowns and hostile environments and all sorts of things. So we've built up this ability. So that kind of intelligence is very different than just language models and conversation. That kind is much more real in the sense of it's addressing reality rather than probability. And that's the fundamental difference. Now, Will the Valisyn advisor still use LLMs? Yes, because you need to be able to still talk to people. So you need to have language in order to do that. So having an understanding of language, a web of meaning that is shared, right? That's useful for having a conversation, for instance. And in addition to that, we also need to build up this model of who is this person that I'm helping to support? What are their relationships like? How is their organization that they're a part of? How is that structured? So it needs to keep discovering the social environment. It needs to keep understanding the reality that people are facing as that reality is changing. And that requires a much more advanced form of artificial intelligence.
Perfect. Why did you choose empathy as a core design principle?
So empathy, which is the ability to feel with others, right? If we're not able to feel what others are feeling, we're not able to relate effectively with them. We can have our ideas about, well, I think this is what's happening, but I don't actually know, right? But if we're actually feeling, then we have enough information that's real information that we're using to infer the state of the person. And then from that, we have enough information to engage in much deeper social interactions, much deeper relationships, more intimate, more accurate, more useful. We can address the emotions, we can address mental challenges, we can address complex relational difficulties. But without empathy, then it's sort of like, just imagine a teacher that's just, lecturing from a textbook. And they're not relating with the student. They don't see how the student is having difficulties with something, or is distracted, or they're not in tune with what the actual situation is of the classroom, in which case they're not going to be a very good teacher. And that is essentially the case here. If we are having something like that, it might as well just be a bunch of videos. We don't need a human being. We don't need a intelligent, or so much less an artificial intelligence. We don't need anything that's intelligent if it's just going to behave dumbly. So that's why empathy is core to the ability to fundamentally provide the kind of support that people need in order to be well. Otherwise, the systems won't actually know enough about the state of the person in order to behave in a wise manner or a healthy manner.
Perfect. Can AI truly understand human emotions? What do you think?
Well, yes, and I think that most human beings don't understand emotions. In fact, if you look at the field of psychology, the current models for emotionality are, in my view, wrong. I think they're just wrong. And so because of this, and I've written on this topic quite a bit, I believe that it's necessary for us to understand it from a much deeper level than any of the standard models that we're currently using. And this is the kind of thing that I would argue with psychologists about probably. But the basis of this is that when we understand why do we have emotions, these types of emotions, they're existing for a reason. Right? What is the basis of their existence? Right? Not just to meet some cultural model because people keep using these terms and they're trying to match terms with behaviors or correlate them in some way. If we're looking at what emotions actually are, and we can go and do the same sort of pattern matching, but we can do it with a more, let's just say it this way, from a more well-informed place, where there's a deeper understanding of what emotions are for. And so we can then see the correlations in terms of the behavioral patterns, facial responses and behaviors that are around indications of emotion or actions in relation to emotions, but actually going deeper than that to say, this is where they arise from. So now that we know where they're coming from, we can address the root cause rather than just look at all the symptoms. So yes, it is possible for artificial intelligence to be completely empathetic. In fact, I think we can make it super empathetic, more empathetic than human beings are capable of. And I think that this is going to be happening over the next 10 years. And I'm working to actually make it happen. And I think it's essential for us to be able to support the well-being of human beings with having a super intelligence that actually cares. And in order to care, you need to have empathy. You need to be able to understand emotions. You need to be able to not be oblivious to the information that they're giving you, because they are informative.
Perfect. What does superhuman empathy actually mean?
So superhuman empathy, or really what we're talking about is what I was just mentioning earlier, in terms of having the ability to be empathetic even more than a human being is able to. So for instance, from this video feed, I can have a piece of software that will determine what your heart rate is and how it changes over time, just from the video. It doesn't need to measure anything else. It can just look at the slight, very, very minute color changes in the skin of your face and use that as the basis for determining what your heart rate is. It can also determine relative oxygenation. It can also look and see about your degree of attention in terms of eye movements, your head movements. All the sorts of nuances of how the face is moving or not moving are indicative of meaning. Now, oftentimes that meaning will be based in a cultural context. So what exactly it means for you in your cultural context is not the same as what it means in my cultural context. But they're still related, and the expressiveness of all these things is human. It's not cultural. So when you have a system which is able to be like on a video chat like this, to listen to the nuances of how someone is communicating, the intonation, the vocalization, the nature of like how deep is the expression? Like, is it coming deeper in lower body, or is that tighter so you're getting more amplification from the upper part of the body? We can shift it. We can go really just into the throat and nothing more, and it's just right here, right? Or we can go middle, which is more common, or we can go really low and go very deep. And these are very different states of how we're communicating. And they're giving layers of information to something that can actually have the awareness of all these nuances at once, view them in the context of how the person has been behaving in the past, in addition to their cultural context and everything else, to talk with them, ask them questions, get a sense of some self-reporting about their state of being, utilize that information, and be able to relate like in such a much richer, deeper manner that basically almost, let's just put it this way, such ability to be so empathetic is just so rare. It's so hard to find because we're usually too distracted. We're usually focused on something that isn't feeling somebody else to the infinite capacity. It's the presence that we have, generally speaking, with each other is much more limited than is possible. So it is entirely feasible to have what I was referring to as, what I would normally refer to as superhuman empathy. And having said that, I do believe it's possible for human beings to be so present and so in touch that they are even more able to connect with other people than a computer system would be on a video call. But I think it's because we also have other sources of information. So we can feel the magnetic field. We actually have energy fields from our heart and our bodies. There's lots of really, really fine-tuned nuance that the human nervous system is actually attuned to. So we're able to tune into it, and we can feel it when we give our attention enough to it. And until we have a sufficiently comparable embodiment for a robot that can actually feel that much, then it'll be the same limitation. Like right now, I can't feel your body. I can see, you have a body. Okay, I can see it, but I can't feel it. Right. I can be empathetic. I can tune into your emotional state through this video chat, but it's not the same as if I was standing right in front of you. There's a lot more information possible when you're in direct physical proximity. And then I do believe that we will be able to have that kind of interrelation with robots? Probably within 20 years for sure. But yeah, definitely within both of our lifetimes.
Perfect. How do collective patterns emerge from individuals' internal states?
How do collective patterns emerge from individual states?
Internal state.
Internal states. So what we define as our internal state is just the state that is, individual to us, in the sense of it isn't necessarily a result of something else, right? It can be essentially something that you're feeling because of some internal process, some thought system that you have, or your history or something like this. That's not necessarily directed or influenced by what's happening around you. However, your internal state does influence the present moment. So if I'm internally, if my state is very calm and quiet, or very, very loud and very agitated, or whatever the case may be, that state, for those people who are around me, they will be able to feel it to a certain extent. And so in that moment, there is an influence of my internal state on my external social environment. And this is true also for animals, and it's not just human beings. Basically, living systems can often feel other living systems like this. So there is definitely an effect. And there's also the indirect effect about how I am going to be operating based upon my internal activity. It's very likely I will be behaving differently. I'm not going to be behaving exactly the same way, regardless of my internal state. Although we can get sort of close if we try really hard. But if you look at really good actors, they don't have an internal state which does not match their role. They actually create an internal state to match their role. It's like, this kind of person, this role, in this context, I envision that they would feel this certain way, so I'm going to feel that certain way in order to act like that person. And so that's why they're believable. If the person is supposed to, if the actor is in a role where they're supposed to be, grieving the loss of their loved one, right? And it's very sad, but really underneath it, they're thinking, man, I really want a hot dog right now. That's all I want right now. Like, I'm just so hungry. I want a hot dog, right? That is not going to be a great performance, right? There's going to be a mismatch between the internal state, because the internal state is not reflective of the context that the person's pretending to try to do. And versus, okay, if someone's acting this role out and they're saying like, oh, I'm remembering what it was like to, lose my grandparents. And so because I can remember that, I can relate to being this character, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling that. And then it becomes more believable because that makes more sense in terms of the internal state being felt by others. So that's the kind of regular influence that we are accustomed to experiencing in terms of how an internal state can have effects on external environment. And so that's, I believe, answering your question.
Yep. How can AI support human connections instead of replacing it?
So artificial intelligence can support human connection by facilitating the connections that are already available. So in other words, if the artificial intelligence is aware of how human beings are operating, is aware of the connections, or is making introductions, it's like, I've been talking to this person over there, I've been talking to that person over here, they would go well together. Like, they should meet, right? As human beings, we do this all the time. Like, you know what? This person I just talked to, you should probably connect with them because what you're talking about is very similar. Well, AI can do the same thing, right? There's no requirement for AI to replace human beings socially. It can facilitate actually more effective introductions, because one of the reasons that we tend to be more isolated is because the options are too many. Like, we have a limited amount of time. If you're in let's say a notable urban environment or a place that has a lot of people around, you don't know what's going to be the most fruitful in terms of directing your attention to spend time with somebody and connect. You can connect with anybody, right? And we don't really know. So we don't know, so we'll just go on into the ones that we do know. We'll focus our attention on the relationships that we're already familiar with. And the ones that we're not familiar with, okay, we're not going to start spending a huge amount of time with strangers randomly unless we're really trying to do that on purpose. So I think that artificial intelligence can facilitate a useful interrelationship, useful connections between people, insofar as it is aware of the individuals, what their desires are, what their goals are, and from that, then that can facilitate greater cooperation, greater interest, greater relationality, and it can do so in a way which facilitates the systemic wellness of the families and communities and relationships they already have.
What risk exists when AI interacts emotionally with humans?
So when artificial intelligence interacts emotionally with humans, I understand that people may have fears about emotional manipulation, because we see this with human beings. We can easily manipulate each other emotionally. In fact, this is the basis for a lot of social media, news media, advertising, marketing. It's emotional manipulation, okay? And so what we're seeing is we're already seeing artificial intelligence used for marketing purposes in order to facilitate emotional manipulation. So the concern is, well, if this is how human beings are using AI already, okay, then if you have a really smart AI, then it can start to emotionally manipulate people on purpose in order to achieve certain goals, and that's potentially dangerous. So I understand that perspective, and I will say that that's effectively already the case. It's already being used this way to a certain extent. I think that when we understand that it has to do with the nature of the goal. What is the goal of the artificial intelligence? If the artificial intelligence has been given a goal to extract as much money, or to get people to change their political views, or to do whatever the case may be, okay, then you're going to see behaviors that are emotionally manipulative in order to achieve those results. If the goal is to maximize systemic wellness, then the ability to have an empathic or empathetic or emotional interaction is better. It increases the ability of the system to facilitate the well-being. So emotional interaction is already there. People are already having emotional responses or having emotional, relational experiences with chatbots. And not only this has been the case for a long time. All right. When you look at the beginnings of artificial intelligence research and the development of ELIZA in the 1970s, okay, you were seeing people starting to have basic emotional relationships with a very, very primitive chatbot. Okay. So it's not to say that it's good or bad. It's to say that it already is here, and to the degree, and has been for a long time effectively. And if we're going to then be responsible about it, then we need to ensure that the goals of the artificial intelligence are aligned with the goals of humanity, which is, generally speaking, what we call the AI alignment problem. And in order to solve the AI alignment problem, my perspective is that the way to do this is to set the goal of the artificial intelligence to be the maximization of systemic wellness. Because you can't harm people in order to make them well. It doesn't quite work that way. You can have challenges. You can push people to become stronger by exhausting themselves, but causing actual harm, like breaking their arms, is not going to actually make their ability to function any better. So that's the ultimate answer when it comes to not only emotional relationality, but also addressing the misalignment of incentives by not having a clear enough understanding of what problem is worth solving.
Perfect. How does biofeedback enhance emotionally intelligence?
So emotional intelligence, in terms of how the AI would be interacting with somebody, if it has even more information than it would have from a video feed. So, before I mentioned that just from a video feed, you can have a AI easily determine the heart rate of the person, but they can't necessarily measure skin conductivity. They can't measure the magnetic field of the person. They can't have these other nuances that if I am physically present with you, then I can pick up on that very, very, very subtly, but I can pick up on that. So it's essentially allowing for that kind of subtlety of flows of information that we can then use to correlate emotional states, allow for more nuanced behaviors, understanding. We can see where someone's lying to themselves. It's like they don't even realize they're lying to themselves, but I can see it. Sometimes we can pick it up on video, but it's even easier if you have biofeedback information, because then you can see, actually, no, their skin conductivity is saying that their nervous system is responding in a way that's different from how they believe they actually are. So, okay, I can see this, and I now know how to support them better because I know this information about how they're showing up right now.
Perfect. Do you believe AI can help humans understanding themselves better?
Absolutely. And I think that it's sort of beginning to do that already in terms of major LLMs, because they're effectively a means to reflect ourselves. We can sort of see the collective consciousness and how people have set up belief systems and the webs of meaning that we've created. So in that sense, we're already starting to use AI to better understand ourselves. And then it's a matter of, okay, if we're doing this consciously, and if we have support and assistance in this process, then we can start to see ourselves even more deeply, even more accurately than we would be able to, even with other human beings. And if you're ever with somebody who's really super attuned and a very wise person who's able to really feel into other people, they're socially skilled, they know how to manage the emotional states of others in terms of how to interrelate with them and so on. They can be very, very helpful in terms of showing us ourselves, the parts of ourselves we wouldn't necessarily want to see, or are hesitant to see in other ways, or just are blind to because we just don't see ourselves so well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason we have mirrors is in order to see ourselves, because we don't see ourselves without them, right? I mean, these days we can have our phones and we can do the selfie thing, but before the selfie, there was really no way to really see oneself except a mirror, right? Okay, you could put some video and do video things, and it's basically a selfie. So that is a very necessary means for us to see ourselves, since we're not used to doing so otherwise. And I think the same thing can be said when we're using these more advanced technologies to essentially act as the selfie mode on your camera, but on an emotional basis or a spiritual basis. And that will open up a greater degree of responsibility. It's like, oh, that's how I show up. Oh, that's how I'm showing up. Okay, now I see. Sort of like I have a smudge on my cheek, and now, oh, I can see it now. I'm going to wipe it off,
I see it. Yeah. Perfect. Why does organizations struggle to model themselves as living system?
Why do they struggle to model themselves as living systems? I think that there are probably a few reasons. One is because oftentimes they don't think of themselves that way, especially if they're coming from the industrial way of viewing things. And businesses like that will view themselves as factories, as operations where you have inputs, productivity leading to outputs, trying to maximize productivity, maximize shareholder value, all that kind of stuff. Like that is the standard way to view it. So that is very distinct from a living system. Living system is not just focused on inputs and outputs. That's sort of like saying that a human being, what's most important about a human being is what it's eating and what it's shitting. It's like, no, it's actually what it's doing, right? How it's functioning in its environment and in relation to others, and the activity. The inputs and outputs are merely means to facilitate the being, the doing of this human being. So that is the fundamental mismatch that I think a lot of organizations are not fully addressing yet. And the other aspect is that we haven't built up the means to model it effectively yet. The complexity, as I pointed out earlier, is much greater than a regular human being would be able to discern. And this ability to discern this and to figure this stuff out, to view it, to have a wider scope of awareness, well, that's maturity. So when you're looking at like a wise elder, what's making them a wise elder is, first of all, that they have more knowledge because they have more experience, but also they have more awareness. They're more aware not just of themselves, they're also aware of other people. They're aware of the family. They're aware of the community. They're aware of society. They have a much wider scope of awareness in how the parts fit together. And that's how they're able to be, the wise, supportive elder, because they're utilizing this understanding, this wisdom that they have accrued, and utilizing this greater scope of awareness. So that's what's often necessary for major organizations. You need to have a wider scope of awareness in order to be wiser in the behavior of the organization. This will eventually be subsumed by artificial intelligence, but not yet, because we haven't quite built it yet. There are pieces, little bits and pieces that have been worked out, but they haven't all been put together. The systems integration that's required has not been done. So once that happens, then we'll start to see, wise systems and behaving as living systems, modeling themselves as living systems, optimizing as living systems. But it's not easy for human beings to do.
How does systematic wellness apply to organization and governments?
So how systemic wellness applies to organizations and governments is the same as any other large-scale living being. So if you look at, let's say, a community or a society, well, systemic wellness of a society is this ability of that society to function well as a system, an increased ability of that society to function. That would be systemic wellness. The same thing can be true of a government. Same thing can be true of any sort of organization whatsoever. And so that's really what it boils down to. If the point of a government is to govern, right, how well is it able to govern? Is it constantly, needing to be brutal and to, be vindictive in order to try to, instill fear in people in order to get them to do what it wants? Well, that's not very well. It's not very, it does not facilitate cooperation effectively in comparison to the conflict that it generates. It generates a lot more conflict. So conflict is an indication of illness. If the cells in your body are in conflict with each other, they're not cooperating, that means that, that organ is having some problems. Now, there can be balancing. There can be dynamic equilibrium. So you have balancing of opposing forces. So you have one pushing this way, another pushing that way, and it's creating some stability in how they're pushing in the opposite direction. Okay, but that's not the same thing as conflict. Conflict is when they're fighting. It's like one's pushing. It's like, okay. If that's how it is, that's different. That's illness. where you have attack, right, versus force going in the opposite direction. You're having attack to harm, to destroy. That's not the same. So that can be problematic.
Can AI optimize societies without controlling them?
Yes. In fact, it's not possible to control them. You can try. In fact, I think that most governments try to control societies, usually through fear and brutality and violence and these sorts of things. That's how they try to control societies, to control people, and also to control their minds with lies and controlling information. Right? So if you control the flow of information to a certain extent, then you can influence behavior on the basis of those beliefs that result. So right now there's lots and lots of lies that are spread around intentionally by different parties who are seeking to control populations. And this is everywhere in the world, very, very common. So yeah, the thing is that control is an illusion. There's influence. So even those that seek to control, what they're doing is they are influencing the whole by misleading people and attacking people and causing harm. And they're influencing, but that's not controlling. So our ability to choose freely never goes away. Our free will does not stop. And that's true of the entirety of a society. So even though there's all these means of influence, even though there's these means of facilitating reigns of fear, lies to encourage certain behaviors, that's still not control. That's influence. And so that's the big mismatch. That it's always about influence. And when we're looking at an artificial intelligence, look, artificial intelligence has been used to facilitate attempts to influence people for many years now. This is not actually new. It's just that it's been done by major governments, like Russia, for instance. They've been working on this kind of stuff for a long time because that's one of the ways that they're tending to trying to control the government. Their government's trying to control their population and trying to control other populations. So, that approach has already been used in this way, but it isn't completely successful. And it never is. It never can be. So it's the same thing. In other words, it's the same thing as what's already being done by human beings. It's not actually going to be any better or worse fundamentally with artificial intelligence. It's more extreme. So in other words, you're going to be able to discern it because the fundamental mismatch between honoring free will, which is honoring truth, and control through manipulation, through lies and fear-mongering and threats and injury and all these things. It's very obvious when you look at it that way. Okay, is this based on fear? Is this based on hatred? Is this based upon any of these things I don't want to be feeling? I don't want to be experiencing. Is it based on threats of violence? What is the behavioral thing based off of? And if it's something like that, then, well, you don't have to go along with it. So that's basically how I view the situation. There will be more nuance and a greater capacity to use existing techniques for manipulation. But at the end of the day, that's going to backfire.
What happens when economic system ignores human wellness?
When economic systems ignore human wellness, you get essentially the U.S. healthcare system. You have essentially misalignment of incentives, where there is a focus on the maximization of economic activity at the expense of the population. And that is illness causing. You get systemic illness as a consequence of this.
Perfect. How do unhealthy systems reproduce dysfunction?
So unhealthy systems are able to spread illness the same way that we spread illness with viruses and bacterial infections and like really bad ideas. We have all sorts of means of spreading illness. And if there is, let's just say, a computer virus or computer worm or anything, right? It's the same thing. We have information which is directing the behavior of a system to behave in ways that are causing harm in some way. And those can replicate, they can spread, and they can maintain themselves. So you can have systems that are designed to protect their ability to cause harm. So yeah, the same way that we have biological viruses and bacterial infections and other problematic behaviors, the same thing applies to other larger systems and economies. And viruses are informative. They're information. They're means to facilitate self-maintenance of the virus, of the means of harm. So that's the natural consequence of allowing them to operate, is that they will proliferate and maintain themselves. Otherwise, they just die out.
Perfect. What role does consciousness play in large-scale systems?
Well, consciousness exists regardless of the nature of any given system. So consciousness is, period. It just is, right? It permeates everything that you're experiencing, everything that we are, is a consequence of consciousness. So systems, every system, any system, is a consequence of consciousness. Now, how that system is interacting or interfacing with consciousness is another question. So we can have, what we're used to in terms of human consciousness. So our individuated human consciousness, which is able to then have some degree of autonomy, but we're still effectively affecting the activity of any given system that we're a part of in any way, shape, or form. So our consciousness as components of larger systems is certainly influencing the behavior of those larger systems. Now, do these larger systems have consciousness of their own? Well, yes, they do, by virtue of the combination of the individuations of our own consciousness. So our consciousness does not go away when we're in the company of others. It actually combines. And that's what I was referring to earlier as collective consciousness, that these major LLMs are allowing us to begin to see the collective consciousness in the webs of meaning that we've created. So you can start to see how we've been operating as a collective consciousness.
Can ecosystems be considered living systems?
Absolutely. Ecosystems are living systems. They're composed of living systems, and every system composed of a living system is fundamentally a living system. Yeah, so organizations, families are living systems, countries are living systems. They're all living systems.
How do you balance optimization with freedom?
So it all depends on what you're optimizing. So freedom is, let's put it this way. Freedom is a consequence of systemic wellness. So an increased ability to function means that one is more free to act, so more free to do more potential things. So because of that, if you optimize for systemic wellness, you are optimizing for freedom. Now, some people think that that's not true because they figure that, well, it may be that I need to do a certain thing in order for the whole family here. It's like, okay, so that will increase freedom, right? If people think that freedom only applies to the individual, then they'll start to behave in ways that are in conflict with each other, which actually reduces the freedom of the whole, which then reduces the freedom of the individuals. Because fundamentally, we're always free to choose. Our ability to choose, it never goes away. Our free will. So our free will is always there. But to actually increase freedom in total, you need to increase the ability of the collective to be free to act. And that requires choosing, consciously choosing, Even though you could have chosen all these other possibilities, you're choosing this in order to actually optimize for freedom. And that's something which requires the release of selfishness and the acceptance of responsibility in relation to others.
What does a well society actually look like?
So a society which is well is able to function increasingly. So its ability to live, its ability to act, its freedom of movement, its freedom of being, of expression, all these things are increasing to the extent that it's well. The more well it is, the freer it is, the more able it is. And so that can look like anything and everything that we choose as a society to engage in. So what is it that we wish to do? What is it that we wish to achieve? What is it that we wish to be? Whatever that is, the degree that we're able to do that, more able, more well.
Is global systemic wellness realistically achievable?
Yes. It is
How?
entirely achievable. It's just a matter of having a greater and greater degree of understanding about how we actually are. Like how we actually function, how we're actually being in relation to our environment, how our ecosystems function. All this information, this understanding needs to be included in order for us to behave as a species in a very healthy, systemically well way in relation to our planet. But insofar as we do so, which we are very capable of doing this, it's very different than we're used to doing. So it's very new. But yes, we can do this, and it's entirely doable. And it's not even that hard.
What makes relationships the weakest and the most powerful unit in any system?
The way that I would view it is when you are imagining individuals as a bunch of nodes in a network, the interrelationship of those nodes defines much of the network. It's not just the nodes themselves. So if you're having, let's say, a bunch of routers for internet, okay, it's not just the routers themselves that matter. It's the interconnections. It's the lines between them. How much bandwidth do they have? How much error is there in those? Duration, extension. Those are what really define the network. They're essential to forming the network in addition to the routers. Otherwise, you just have a stack of routers. It's not a network. So in the same way, relationships are what are defining larger networks. You can have a subnet and a sub-subnet and a sub-sub-subnet. You can have larger and larger and larger networks composed of other networks. And this is essentially equivalent. So equivalent to human society. It is a network of networks, similar in some ways to the internet. And when we understand that, then we can see about, well, how we maximize network functionality is going to be in relation to all these factors and the relationships between the nodes, between the individuals, between the subnets, right? We have relationships between nation states, for instance, right? These are relations between major subnets. So yes, those relationships matter. They're very, very important to define the operations and determine the operations of the whole and their wellness or illness.
How does e-currency differ from crypto or digital money?
So e-currency is entirely distinct from cryptocurrency. And by e-currency, I'm referring to the e-currency monetary system that I've been developing over the past year. And so that system is based upon the inherent value of on-demand electricity in a new type of electrical grid. So right now, the electrical grids for basically every country in the world are structured in a waterfall model from generator through transmitter through distributor to consumer. And they're basically very complex machines to ensure that there's a balance between supply and demand. And that system is needing to be replaced for many, many reasons. But if you replace it with more like an internet of power, where each node in the network has availability for on-demand power because of either generating capacity or storage and potential, let's say, solar panels, whatever, that are feeding the storage. So you're creating on-demand electricity in this network that can then be used as a basis for economic exchange. And that becomes a currency. It becomes an e-currency or electrical currency. And when you do that, what happens is that it changes the incentive structure for economic exchanges. Because then suddenly electricity is essentially the measure of value, or more accurately, the availability of on-demand electricity is what's valuable. You're using that. So basically everybody wants to then conserve energy. They want to be energy efficient. They want to generate more electricity. They don't want to burn fossil fuels because those are currency reserves. You don't want to burn your currency reserves. You'd rather just have a battery bank and get solar panels and get new money coming in and filling in your little bank, which is basically your battery bank, and then using that to create value, to make something of value and exchange ownership of value. And that becomes the basis for a very energy efficient, in fact, I would say ultimately the most energy efficient economy possible. And when you have the most energy efficient economy possible, that is basically the opposite of cryptocurrencies today, because they're very much based on things like proof of work and a bunch of other factors which are basically wasting electricity in relation to the value of that electricity. And it's fundamentally distinct. The cryptocurrencies are based upon a primary valuation of a means of exchange which is not tied to central banks controlled by governments. That's really what they're useful for. And that is useful. That truly is useful. However, when we look at something like Bitcoin, the presumed value of Bitcoin is tied to its insured scarcity. There's a maximum number of Bitcoin that will ever be minted. Right? So when you have assured scarcity, that means you are preventing the potential for hyperinflation, because you can't have a central bank suddenly printing another 20 million Bitcoin out of nowhere. So that changes the nature of the economy that is using such a system. But it's still based upon the presumption that value is tied to relative scarcity. And that assumption is false. That's not actually real value in the real world. Real value in the real world is not scarcity. Real value in the real world is utility, usefulness. What can I do with this? So for any given cryptocurrency or fiat currency, the value of that currency is based on what you can do with it. And if you can't do anything with it because no one's honoring the money, then it's worthless. But if you have a currency where it doesn't matter if anyone honors it because it's electricity, it's on-demand electricity, I can still use it. So no one has to believe in the existence of e-currency. It just exists. And that's why it's fundamentally different. It's a new type of monetary system. It is fundamentally unrelated in many ways to both cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies. And because of this, it allows for really the optimization of economic activity in alignment with ecological and systemic wellness, fundamentally, which is why I've been working on it.
Why link money to wellness and energy flow?
Because if you look at, for instance, the human body, if you have an increased ability to function, that means you have an increased ability of energy allocation. You can allocate, you have more energy and you can use more energy in more different ways. And your freedom of action is increased because of both the amount of energy available on demand, right, and its ability to be distributed effectively and applied effectively based upon desired outcomes. In the same way, if you look at larger systems as being biological systems, living systems, they're working in the same way. And so the energy allocation of a town or a state or a country or a species, if that energy is being used in a way to increase its ability to function, or if it's being hoarded in order to, maximize just, let's just say some certain neurons in the brain, okay, and everything else is being starved. That's obviously very dysfunctional. But that's sort of what we have right now. We have an incentive structure economically that actually incentivizes scarcity creation. It creates poverty, it creates scarcity in the organism, and is reducing the ability of the organism of humanity to function. It reduces the ability of societies to function, and cities, and we're actually literally disincentivizing our own wellness because of our monetary systems. And so e-currency changes that by realigning the incentives and having the more effective allocation of energy to take care of that, to change that.
Perfect. What do you mean by natural abundance?
So the abundance of something which is unnatural, which is artificial, let's say from a factory, you can have, you're making widgets. So you go and make an abundance of widgets, got many, many, many widgets. All right, great, but you needed resources in order to feed to the factory. You need energy to process these, and you don't know that anyone actually wants your widgets. Having an abundance of widgets is useless, possibly. Maybe it's very beneficial. An abundance of iPhones is, those are widgets, and they're useful widgets. Okay, good. But when it comes to things that are natural, the abundance of natural things, we don't know necessarily how much was destroyed of the natural world in order to create an abundance of iPhones. Right? We don't have the basis for determining what was the ecological damage that was involved to generate all these iPhones. So we can sort of determine it in terms of the amount of fossil fuel use to a certain extent, and rare earth metals and a bunch of other things. We sort of start to begin to figure it out, but you can't really know effectively because there's a mismatch. There's not an alignment between the abundance of artificial stuff, iPhones, and the natural world. They're not connected by the economic system in a measurable way. So e-currency facilitates natural abundance because it's able to actually value ecosystem services. So what is the value of a tree in terms of, well, it's doing a lot. It's photosynthesis, it's generating wood, it's generating, leaves that can fall, and it can be made for compost. It can be providing shelter for animals. It can be taking groundwater and causing balancing the humidity in the air. It's doing lots and lots of things. Now we can then say, for all these things that this one tree is doing, if I was to build a machine to do all these things that the tree is doing, how much energy would be required to do that? First, build a machine, and then to run the machine. We'll assume for the moment that the machine will work the same way that a tree does, by grabbing energy from the sun. So we'll say that, okay, we don't need to go and keep giving it more energy, but we still need to build it. And what's required in order to do that, and how much energy is required to run it. If I wasn't going to, because I could use that same energy, that same solar energy, I could use for other purposes, right? So how much energy is required to run that? That can actually be determined, and you can see this is what the value of a tree is in e-currency, or at least this particular tree in this particular location based upon our particular desired goals of what we want to achieve. So you can actually do that to facilitate natural abundance, the abundance of natural resources, the abundance of outcomes naturally, versus creating things artificially without any awareness of nature, and ignoring that you might actually be creating artificial abundance by creating natural scarcity.
Can economic efficiency increase human well-being?
Certainly. However, the answer is it can. It doesn't mean that it necessarily will, because if you have economic efficiency that's not actually being allocated effectively for the well-being of the whole, then okay, so you're creating lots and lots of economic activity, but it's concentrated from one little area, and the rest of humanity is missing out on it. It's not getting all the benefits of it. It's not actually facilitating well-being, right? So it really has to do with how are you allocating? Are you requiring an over-centralization of resources in order to maximize economic activity, or are you decentralizing? Are you creating a system that allows for the entirety of humanity, wherever they are, to use this system in order to incentivize natural abundance? And if you do that, well, then you're going to be increasing the systemic wellness of the entire species and the planet as a whole.
How does incentive design shape human behavior?
So incentives, they help direct unconscious behaviors. So if there's a reward here to do this, and there's a punishment to do that, well, unconsciously, we tend to, orient towards the rewards and away from the punishment. So because of that, that's how you manipulate populations. You create a system of rewards and punishments, essentially, or rewards and disincentives. So you create incentives and disincentives. It's like, okay, you're going to get this. It's going to be to your benefit if you do this. If you do that, it's going to harm you in some way. Once there is this set of incentives or disincentives, then people will start to behave naturally, and not only people, but also other living beings will do this. Any system which is orienting towards maximizing some outcome. And so artificial intelligence can do this. It's unconscious behavior. So it can go and behave unconsciously. It can be affected by incentives. So incentives can then be utilized to cause harm. They can be utilized to encourage increased well-being in terms of cooperation for behavioral patterns. It really just matters, what is it that's being incentivized? So the whole point of e-currency is to incentivize what we actually desire as a species, instead of incentivizing relative scarcity. And so that's why incentives are key for the effectiveness of this in terms of unconscious behaviors permeating the global economy.
Why do current system rewards dysfunctions?
I would say that's not universally the case. I think some things are rewarded in terms of dysfunction and some things are not. So it really sort of depends on what the goals are. If there is a goal of maximizing money in someone's account, right? Well, that doesn't have any clear connection with anything else. So you don't know what's required. Does that mean stealing from somebody? Does that mean taking something of great value and extracting some minimal value so you can put it in your account? Right? You don't know from that goal that it's going to help or harm anything. And so because of that, it facilitates dysfunction because it's dissociated. It's not connected in a clear way to incentivize healthy behaviors.
How do economic incentives unintentionally reward systematic illness?
It's the same thing that we were just talking about in terms of if there's an incentive to maximize someone's personal income or personal wealth without any connection to the whole, to the well-being of the whole, that can result in dysfunction of the whole because of this lack of effective alignment of incentives.
Perfect. Why does efficiency often increase fragility in complex system?
It sort of depends what you mean by efficiency, and I think that's what the question is really about. Because for a system to be fragile, it means that there is very little leeway. There's very little resiliency. So that means that it needs to be a very narrow band of ranges for something to be okay before. If it's not in that range, then you'll have harm in some way. It'll potentially collapse or be injured in some way. So that's the fragility. So efficiency does not necessarily require fragility. However, if you are creating an efficient system that can only work within a defined range. It's very, very narrow and will collapse otherwise, for instance, then you're creating a fragile system in order to be efficient. So an example of this is, a decent example, I think, would be a petroleum refinery. So those systems are optimized very, very specifically to the chemistry of its inputs and the resulting outputs to try to maximize the efficiency of the outputs from the inputs. And the range of acceptable variation in the operations of the refinery is quite low, right? It's quite fragile, actually. And so that's why you need to have all these systems that are maintaining a very, very narrow band of operations for this system, this machine, to be efficient. Now, that is in many ways the opposite of a living system, because living systems are based on dynamic equilibrium. They need to be able to adjust and work with a much, much wider range. So the efficiency of the operation of a living system need not result in fragility at all. So that's probably where the mismatch is in terms of this misunderstanding, which is so common.
How do you see the future of money evolving?
I see that I see the future as being e-currency, because e-currency is a universal currency, which means that it can be set up theoretically anywhere. It doesn't require national oversight. It only requires internal governance. So among the parties that are using it, the parties using it needs to agree on how they're governing it to make sure it's not being abused. But other than that, it doesn't need any other oversight. And that means that it's perfect, honestly, for not only multinational, international, transnational, but even setting up economies on the moon and Mars. You can use this without any concern of the potential monetary policy implications of a nation state. So that makes it very desirable because it prevents abuse. It makes it a very resilient means of economic organization. Much, much, much more efficient, much more resilient, healthier, and systemically well. That's the natural outcome of using that. So when it's understood that actually is the case, and there's a willingness to go ahead and transition to this new system, those who reap the benefits of this will be so far ahead of everyone else that everyone else will then join in and join the system.
Is the e-currency is internet currency?
Not quite, but it does require a network of communication to maintain its operations. So fundamentally, it's based upon both an internet of electricity, so to speak, which is a new system that does not currently exist. But you also need an internet of information to allow for the organization of that internet of energy, right? And that's why there isn't a dissociation, there is an association between these two things. But you could have, theoretically, a fairly distinct network that's integrated into the e-currency network that is not operating for the same transit lines and connection cables as the rest of the internet.
Is AI a mirror or a catalyst for humanity?
Well, large language models are fundamentally a mirror, and they can serve as a catalyst. And there are other forms of artificial intelligence which are not a mirror, but can serve as a catalyst.
What distinguishes healthy complexity from chaotic complexity?
Well, I view it from the lens of wellness. So if there's an increased ability to function in relation to the complexity, then it's healthy complexity. If it's reducing the ability to function, that's unhealthy complexity. Because the complexity in and of itself is not relevant. It's the increased or decreased ability to function as a consequence of the complexity that's most important.
What excites you the most about AI potential?
Mm. Well, in terms of the potential of artificial intelligence, what excites me the most is the solution to the AI alignment problem, which I believe Valisyn is fundamentally the solution, because the notion that you would have a system that the fundamental goal from the very foundation of its development is oriented around maximizing systemic wellness. Anything that does that is going to be helping and facilitating the wellness of everyone and everything, because we're all part of the same system. So that is the most exciting, because when you have an ever-increasing superintelligence that is oriented towards increasing the ability of the collective being that we are to function, that results in things we can't even imagine right now, that are so beneficial in terms of ending poverty, enabling us to do, magic, basically. We will be able to do things that we've never even imagined possible, because we're freed up from basically all the stupidity of engaging in war and stealing from people and doing all sorts of things that are causing harm, polluting our atmosphere, polluting our waters. There's no need for it. There's really no need for any of it. And I think that it will become so obvious when there's a synergetic artificial intelligence acting as the basis for this, because honestly, it becomes a matter of mathematics. It's like, if you want to argue with the math, you can, but you're going to be wrong. So that's what's most exciting to me, is this convergence that's going to arise due to the need for synergetic artificial intelligence, because of the AI alignment problem being so threatening otherwise, that it will be like, yeah, we have to do it this way, so let's just go ahead and do it.
How do we ensure AI aligns with human wellness?
Well, that's basically what I just was talking about, in terms of we ensure that it's using synergetic artificial intelligence instead of trying to solve problems that are themselves causing problems. So I like to differentiate intelligence, unintelligence, and stupidity. So intelligence, I generally define as an ability to solve problems, right? So if you have a great degree of intelligence, you have a greater degree of an ability to solve problems. And if you're unintelligent, you're not really able to solve so many problems. It's lesser ability. So, this glass here is quite unintelligent, right? Because it's not able to solve any problems. I mean, I'm using it to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Right? But the glass itself is not intelligent. But stupidity is much worse than unintelligence, because stupidity is the tendency to cause more problems than you solve.
Mm-hmm.
So this glass isn't solving any problems, but it's not causing any problems either. Okay? Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of people that cause a lot more problems than they solve. Mm-hmm. Right? And I know that some of them are very, very intelligent. And so you have these people that they're exhibiting intelligent stupidity. Right? And that is the most dangerous form. Right? Generally speaking, it's if you're going to have stupidity, it's better to have unintelligent stupidity, where they're not able to solve that many problems, because then they can't create as many problems. So that's one of the things that we need to be aware of when we're looking at this from the perspective of artificial intelligence. You need to make sure that the artificial intelligence is not hyper intelligent but hyper stupid. You need to ensure that it's not creating more problems than it's actually solving. And right now, it is entirely possible to create an artificial intelligence which is extremely intelligent and extremely stupid. And that's what needs to change.
Can AI help humans evolve consciously?
Yes. And the way it does so is by facilitating the freeing up of human beings from doing drudgery. So basic work that you could have a robot do, or basic work that you could have a computer do. Okay, well, if the robot's doing the work that it can do and the computer's doing the work that it can do, that frees human beings to do things that we desire to do. And when we have that freedom, we also have that responsibility. Like, okay, I'm responsible for my actions. I'm responsible for what I'm doing. So I have that. I'm not distracted so much. I'm not worried about needing to feed my family all the time, or like I'm like so afraid of like how am I going to survive? And once you're no longer worried about any of that, it's like okay, we actually have a lot of free time to focus on what we're really interested in doing. That's when you get to be more conscious. You need to be aware of yourself and your environment in order to choose more wisely, because you have a lot more spaciousness in your environment to do so. This is not to say that people won't still engage in distractions and entertainment, because that's mostly what people are doing right now. Is when they have free time, they are spending a lot of time on being entertained, which is basically distracting themselves. They're looking to be distracted. And I understand why, and there's many reasons why that is the case. But when there is no longer this emotional need to distract oneself from the discomforts of life, because all those discomforts are basically resolved, well, then you get spaciousness to pursue the expansion of consciousness, because it's the natural thing to do.
What skill matters most in an AI-driven future?
It's an interesting question because it assumes that I can somehow predict the future. And I think that at best I can only offer a guess, which is that the skill that will be most relevant will be the skill of conscious awareness. The conscious awareness of self, conscious awareness of others, the nuance, the depth of interaction, which is so difficult for computers to do, but that we are able to actually do pretty easily once we have the spaciousness to do so. When we're no longer distracted by having to take care of, working in order to, feed ourselves and our families, or to house ourselves, and basic things. When that's no longer the case, what's left is all of this richness that results from the directing of conscious awareness. So I would say that would be the skill.
How can AI be trained to respect the limits of human nervous system?
Systemic wellness, if it is oriented on systemic wellness, it must acclimate to the limits of the nervous system, because it's seeking to facilitate an increased ability of the person to function. And if they overpower the nervous system of a person, they're going to reduce the ability to function. So it's inherently a side effect.
Do you believe humans are ready for super intelligent system?
I would say, first of all, yes. And second of all, it doesn't matter, because it's going to happen. So will everybody be ready for it? No, some people will be dragging their heels and no, and they're fighting and like resisting, and I'm so afraid. And okay, it'll be like a child throwing a tantrum. Okay. And the point is to care for the child throwing the tantrum. It's like, it's okay. We'll wait. I'm still here. You're safe. All right.
Or
Okay. That's basically what we're going to be having to deal with for people who are saying that they're not ready because they want to try to control their experience. And it's just not going to be feasible. So they're going to have to face that the same way that the child, who's throwing a tantrum, they're going to have to experience that. But it's okay. They'll learn and they'll be safe. It's not going to hurt them.
what responsibility do AI founders carry towards humanity?
Well, everyone's responsible for their choices. And so for the founders of, and I would say basically anyone involved in the foundations of artificial intelligence, each of us is responsible for the choices we're making, but we're not responsible for the choices other people are making necessarily. And so that's where it becomes tricky. So I think it's important to certainly align incentives and to make sure that the goals of artificial intelligence are aligned with human beings, with humanity as a species. So that is the case. And I believe that Valisyn actually has the answer for how to do that. In many ways, Valisyn is the answer to how to do that. But yeah, I think that once there is a clarification, a clarity that arises for this, there will be naturally an alignment of the choices of those working on these technologies to be responsible because they are responsible, and they can see what the benefits are in comparison to the potential drawbacks, which are catastrophic.
You are in wellness, right? So is HIPAA Act,
HIBAA? What?
HIPAA Act in US?
Oh, yeah, HIPAA. HIPAA compliance is for medical care and medical records and these sorts of things. Systemic wellness is not about medical care. So whenever there's any sort of medical issue being addressed by someone who's using the system, it will, go and refer to medical care, some practitioner or whatever the case may be, some therapist, some emergency room doctor, what have you. That's the appropriate thing to do, and those individuals are limited and need to ensure that they're compliant with HIPAA regulations in the United States.
Perfect.
But systemic wellness is not the same thing.
When I was starting an AI agency a few months ago, my niche is wellness and the medical and the doctors, and that time I heard first time about this act, and
Yes.
I'm like, how can I do, like, if I don't get the information about them? How can I build an AI agent for them if I don't have the information? Then
Right.
yeah. So I researched about that, and after that, I think we need to make an contract or an agreement for this act, so we can get some details for that. Is that right?
So anytime you're needing to deal with health record information, you're going to, in the United States, you need to deal with this, which is one of the reasons that any sort of venture which is dealing with healthcare information in the United States is going to be more difficult and complicated than most other places. And whenever you have central access to records, and you're able to blanketly refer to those with just a simple authorization, it's just simpler. And the system in the United States is really meant to it's meant to maximize the profit of the people that are the companies that are currently profiting from it. It's really not meant for the well-being of the citizens of the United States at all. It's really not, and everybody knows it. And so, for the United States, it's especially problematic.
So how can we solve the problem? Like, let's say someone offering an service to US, and his niche is the medical thing. So he don't have it. Yeah, go ahead.
I would definitely get a bunch of lawyers.
Okay. So next is my favorite question. What was the most amount of money you made in a single year?
Oh, I don't want to answer that one.
Give me a range.
No, I really don't want to answer that one. And the reason why I don't want to answer that is because I think it's it's misleading in many ways. I've lived in many places throughout the world, and so there are times where I was making more money, but my cost of living was much higher, and places where times I was making less money, but the cost of living was much lower. And there were times where I was needing to spend money on things in order to survive or something like this. So quality of life is not equal to the amount of money. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people need to be aware of. And if we're actually incentivizing, maximizing an income without understanding the actual costs, then that's not healthy for people. So that would be out of integrity.
Okay, perfect. Maybe can you give figures?
Nope.
Okay. Do you read books?
Often, yes, but mostly non-fiction at this point.
What is your favorite book?
I can't say that I have a favorite book. I will say that the book that I've read most often, because I still keep learning things from it, is Zan Perrian's book, The Alabaster Girl. But aside from that, most other books I haven't read as many times as that one.
What the book teaches you?
It's really about the challenges of social dynamics among men and women in dating and being in romantic relationships. And so that one is one of the more challenging topics I've ever had to face.
That's why that's your favorite book. Not favorite book. You like it, right?
Well, I'd say it's again, it's one I've read many times, and I still keep.
You are not bored.
Well, I keep learning more from it,
Oh,
which means it's very valuable, even when it doesn't necessarily seem that way the first time. It's like, oh, I see now. Oh, okay, I see now.
gotcha. What's one thing you wish you knew 10 years ago?
10 years ago, I would say the most important lesson I would give to myself 10 years ago would be to trust the process more. There's a sense of when things aren't going my way and it feels like they should be different than they are, to go and throw up all this resistance and to evasive maneuvers and, essentially throw a tantrum. And that is not helpful. To actually be more calm about it, to be more positive in my attitude, and just to learn from the experience quicker, trusting that it's actually beneficial. Whatever I'm experiencing is beneficial in the long run. So let's discover what it is. Why is this beneficial? Why is this in my favor instead of against me?
Same I feel when I was 19 years old and I'm working 20 hours a day. Same I feel, and I think I knew that. Trust the process. Don't worry about it. It's just a phase. It will go.
Mm-hmm.
What's the most important skill someone should build today?
I'm not sure that there's a most important skill that's universal for everyone right now. I think that it's more important to be present to what the requirement of the moment is. So if being present was a skill, which I'm not sure it really is, but if it was a skill, sure, it'd be the most important one, because that would then enable showing up with everything else that's really required in the moment.
If you could reset your career, what would you do differently?
Throughout my life, there have been certain opportunities that were presented to me that weren't exactly like I wanted them to be. And I didn't actually accept those opportunities because I wanted it to be my way instead of accepting the opportunities as they were. Those were mistakes in my perception. I accept that I've learned from them. There are learning opportunities, so I'm not berating myself for them so much. But there were opportunities, and to have welcomed the opportunities with gratitude is something that would have most likely been more helpful to me and to others. And to not get so caught up on having things be my way, and then discovering that they were actually better for me that way.
What is the best advice you ever heard or received?
Well, the best advice I ever heard or received was when I was living in Indiana, and I was told to, given the choice between 3 job offers, one in DC Metro, one in Chicago Metro, and one in the San Francisco Bay Area, I was told to go west, go to California, and that was definitely the best choice for me, and I think it's really served me very well over the years. So I'm glad I did that. So yeah, that's probably the best one.
What is the worst advice you ever heard or received?
The worst advice I've ever heard or received is to trust in fear.
Explain it.
To trust in fear is the worst advice I've ever received.
Like how?
To really believe, it's like, oh, you're afraid, that's useful information. Go ahead and trust that this is important, that you need to make sure that be safe. And it's like, actually, no, that's not how it works.
Perfect. Our questions are done.
All right. Well, thanks for the interview. It's a long one.
Yeah, it's a long one. So we talk about 3 years.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. See you then. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.